They are stabbed to death with 3 knives or hung with the rope. Economic confusion and corporate dilemmas force companies to take sharp turns, turning 7 or 8 corners. Although some have also turned onto the Sunshine Avenue, many companies either turn into the sower and capsize, or turn into thorny bushes, leaving their bodies scarred. Entrepreneurs work hard, but their hearts are even harder. In confusion, and despair, many entrepreneurs from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and mainland China began to meditate on Buddhism and seek spiritual comfort and conversion from religion. The saying goes, life and death are destined, wealth and honor are in heaven. They believe that there are gods in the underworld who dominate the fate of the world and pray for Bodhisattva to guide the enterprise's fans. Entrepreneur's mind is captured by agnosticism and fatalism, and a direct byproduct is the big gain criticized temple monks. So, since the sin suffered by enterprises after becoming bigger and stronger is a micro-original sin that fully releases the sins created, is it not? Does it mean that this is the result of the company's own actions? What is it worth? Not really, because since it is original sin, it is naturally innate and built in, and since there is built-in, there is pre-existing. This prerequisite is the effective supervision and correct guidance of the government on the original sin of enterprises, and China and the United States have precisely gone to 2 extremes on this issue. One is the absence of regulation, and the other is the offside of regulation. Why can subprime mortgages mess up the global economy? The root cause lies in the fact that nearly 10 institutions, including the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and the Stock Exchange, have been dealing with the inherent sin of excess in finance. The overlapping authorities and regulatory gaps have basically left the 5 major investment banks in a state of monk umbrella, which is why the crisis has become rampant. Looking back at the 30 years of China's reform, government behavior has also had a profound impact on the life and death of enterprises. Due to the extended administrative hand, the result is often that when the macro level is tight, private enterprises will suffer. In 2004, in order to make a soft landing for the overheated economy, relevant departments carried out selective punishments and forced private enterprises in the steel, cement, and electrolytic aluminum industries to retreat one by one. In recent years, private enterprises have frequently been squeezed by the state-owned enterprise sector and the policy ceiling, causing them to die and a large area to die. Taking licenses as an example, small and medium-sized enterprises cannot allow new products to be launched into the market without obtaining more than 10 licenses. These various production licenses on the surface are management, but in essence, they are the rent-seeking rights that enterprises fall and freeze to death along the cycle. 2. How to stand out. Enterprises are already destined to die or live, and the so-called fate appears to be determined by personality, while the essence is but it was caused by original sin. In a macro sense, original sin refers to the inevitable trend of market economy development towards surplus. which requires evaporation and liquidation in order to restore the dynamic equilibrium of the market. In the micro sense, original sin refers to the ambition and greed for excessive profits in human nature that lure enterprise into unconsciously falling into a trap, either for the sake of competition. In the words of the boss of Zhejiang Oaks Group, only by keeping opponents awake can I sleep. Either we strive to become bigger and stronger, desperately building big ships, resulting in overproduction in society. From this perspective, micro-original sin is the source code of macro-original sin. Once the original sin is indulged, the consequences are very serious. The most classic is that the greed of investment banks killed Wall Street. In addition, big trees catch the wind and see. Companies that are too powerful are prone to political repair. When choose buttons account for 90% of the world's buttons, lighters account for 80%. And umbrellas account for 80%. After killing all its competitors around the world, it was discovered that the other government was already holding a big stick and preparing to deal with him. Faced with political dominance, most companies can only lie down on the spot. When a company is still in its childhood, its fate is basically the boss's mind, vision, courage, legal intelligence, etc. Diagonal lines of various human elements. On the one hand, the growth of enterprises often benefits from the resilience and drive of bosses who do not abandon or give up. On the other hand, the limitations of the boss themselves also affect the life and death of the enterprise. For example, when two small bosses have strong tactics, courage, and the courage to make quick money, but generally lack strategy, and the transformation of enterprises is simple and blind. This may not be a bad thing for individuals, but for enterprises, it may evolve into disasters under specific conditions, due to the emphasis on tactics over strategy, and the emphasis on the immediate and long term. The crisis was scattered and scattered. It can be said that the fate of small and medium-sized enterprises is roughly the materialization of the boss's personality, a microcosm of his personality, and on a company is tempted by the original sin and strives to grow and strengthen. Its fate begins to deviate from its boss or the control of entrepreneurs. Accepting various external shocks such as industry prosperity, market cycles, policy adjustments, and international crises. At present, enterprises are generally facing three knives. One rope, which refers to cost increases, exchange rate fluctuations, and foreign trade. Future countries will be extremely sensitive to food prices, and control the rise in grain prices will become the focus of policies in various countries. In the short term, international grain prices may rise or fall due to the government's efforts to control the situation by increasing energy market supply and introducing subsidy policies. But food prices have actually embarked on the irreversible path of oil prices, and what countries are doing with oil prices now may follow suit in the future. Oil prices have prompted countries to jointly reflect on energy policies. And future food prices cannot be fixed by a single country adjusting its policies. Multiple leaders have engaged in a food summit, but measures to stabilize food prices in various countries may be resolved through genuine interests. More importantly, unexpected events such as natural and man-made disasters, financial turmoil, etc. will increase the dispersion of future food prices. As for whether international grain prices will rise and fall, whether they will remain at a high level or return to normal, it depends on the combined force of various uncertain factors, especially whether countries can reach a consensus on the issue of grain prices consistent. Nowadays the oil price has not yet unified the front line, and the solution to the food price problem is clearly even more elusive. Therefore, in the long run, both the country and the market will keep up with food prices, and international organizations may play a greater coordinating role. And China has clearly become an oasis in this food price tsunami. The increase in domestic grain prices is relatively flat, stable, with an increase of 6.8%, 7.4%, and 11.4% from March to May, respectively, because the self-sufficiency rate of grain in our country is as high as 95%. And the 150 to 200 million tons of grain reserves make the Chinese people have food in their hands and have peace of mind. More importantly, China's grain prices have not yet been liberalized, and the firewall of price controls has isolated the soaring international grain prices. In addition, the government has taken measures such as transferring grain from the north to the south, reducing exports, and raising the minimum purchase price of rice and wheat, so that China has not fallen into the vortex of the international food crisis. But after all, the current prices of rice and wheat in China are only about a quarter and one-third of the international prices, and the gap between domestic and international grain prices is constantly accumulating upward. Why? In order to stabilize food prices since March, China Storage Grain Corporation and COFCO Group have sold wheat and rice in Power of the Future ethanol market in the alliance with Brazil Union. On the other hand, reducing exports can drive up grain prices, accumulate wealth for multinational grain merchants such as Bangji, use its territory to expand and erode other countries' agricultural industry chains, and create global inflation to suppress their economies. As long as the United States increases its agricultural product investment or shortens in the futures market, it can cause international prices to plummet, indicating that the United States has taken the lead. This forces other countries to compete and use abacus to resist. Europe is occupying the high end of biodiesel technology in order to gain a share in the future. Southeast Asia is trying to establish a rice alliance to compete for rice pricing power to save itself, while a few countries are encroaching on some links of the food industry chain by creating a food empire. However, more countries, especially those in Africa and Latin America, are forced to become victims, and countries heavily dependent on food imports will undoubtedly be constrained in this strategic confrontation. After calculating these large accounts, The complexity of food prices is clearly greater than that of oil prices. Global warming changes farming layout. Natural disasters have become an irregular bomb. The high fever of grain prices exacerbates the wealth gap, feeding the food giants but starving the poor people to death. The intensification of the situation, turbulence, and the confrontation of national strategies have involved too many sensitive factors in food production, and have also broken its original stable pattern. So in the future, a food war may be imminent, and food prices will become a competitive point for countries in the game. However, countries may also fall into a prisoner's dilemma in the food game. In order to seek self-protection and restrict exports, countries originally intended to lower domestic grain prices, but export controls led to a sharp decline in international trade in grain and pushed up international grain prices, causing domestic grain prices to rise. All countries hope that other countries will reduce their food hoarding, but they involuntarily become hoarders because you don't hoard others. You will also hoard, and food prices naturally fall into the paradox of a price increase cycle. Due to the many stories behind food prices and the sensitivity of hot topics, their uniqueness and instability are clearly intensifying, which will undoubtedly increase the probability of future fluctuations in food prices. But governments around the world cannot sit idly by as food prices soar. So in the sudden trend in grain prices under the financial civilization, the rise in food prices has become an inherent inevitability, and may be promoted to a catastrophic resource product. Repeating the same trend as oil, the price has gone wrong. The prices of international wheat, corn, soybeans, rice and other commodities have risen sharply, with an average increase of 16.5% in the first quarter, and TAMI broke through $1,000 per ton in April, more than doubling in 3 months. As of the end of May, global rice prices had risen by about 57% compared to the same period street year. Even more serious is the instability in food prices, which has led to riots in 37 countries and plunged over 100 million people worldwide into famine. So how will food prices change in the future? Firstly, let's look at the attitudes of all parties towards food prices. Institutions are generally bullish on grain prices, and most predict that grain prices will reach 2008 or 2009 at its peak. Some believe that the shortage of food supply and demand will continue until around 2010, after which nominal prices will decline. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations predicts that food prices will fall from record highs in the short term, but unexpected events may still lead to a surge in food prices in the coming quarters, which will last for at least 10 years. Obviously, high grain prices have become a consensus among all parties, but the debate over grain prices is divided. The United Nations blames the food crisis on the erroneous policy of underestimating agricultural investment over the past 20 years, and biofuels have become a target of criticism. The US and UK governments refuse to acknowledge it, but many Western lawmakers have urged the government to stop the crazy Food for Fuel program. The standoff between the US government and Congress on the new agricultural law also indicates an intensification of internal differences in the West. However, in order to shirk responsibility, the West has jointly targeted China and India's high demand for food. The US president even recklessly accused India's 350 million middle class of eating high food prices, causing a strong backlash in the Indian political arena. It can be seen that all parties have acknowledged the rise in food prices, but they do not take responsibility, and are caught in a chaos of finding scapegoats for the rise in food prices in the "you push me to block" situation. Secondly, pursue the cultural clues behind the rise in food prices. The quantitative changes in food prices, due to various factors: population growth, diet, the market, for several times to stabilize food prices. Experts predict that the period for domestic grain prices to be relatively independent of international grain prices is only 12 months. So although domestic food prices may appear optimistic, they may actually be the calm before the storm. At present, filling the gap between domestic and international positions determines the overall trend of rising domestic food prices. But relevant parties are trying to control its inflation. Therefore, under the protection of policies in the short term, the price difference of grain may further expand. In the medium to long term, domestic grain prices may gradually keep up with international grain prices. In the future, the most likely problems in price alignment are not in wheat, rice, but in soybeans, because the first few items are basically self-sufficient domestically and have little correlation with international prices. The dependence on soybean imports is as high as 80%, and the industrial chain is highly monopolized by foreign investment. In fact, domestic soybean prices have basically been in line with international standards, which greatly increases the possibility of international borrowing of soybeans to impact domestic grain prices. Meanwhile, in the future, it is likely that relevant parties will find it increasingly difficult to suppress the rise in food prices, and can only moderately and timely let the market speak. In addition to rationalizing the food price formation system, participating in international agricultural trade for hedging and increasing direct subsidies to farmers and consumers may become the key to the peaceful evolution theory of domestic food prices in the future. There is already upward momentum in adjustments, but the qualitative change in food under the impact of civilization has accelerated its recurrence of the oil price mistake. On the one hand, biofuels endow food with energy attributes, exacerbating the contradiction between grain and oil substitution and the competition between people and vehicles for food. 70 liters of biofuel consume a person's annual rations but can only drive a car forward for about 700 kilometers. The World Bank predicts that corn ethanol can save 2% of global oil consumption, but it will cause a 30% increase in food prices. On the other hand, food prices are distorted by the highly financialized capital system. Wall Street speculators have become the world's largest hoarders of food. In 2007, half of the total output value of corn, soybeans, and wheat in the United States was held by buyers of agricultural futures, and agricultural funds exceeded $150 billion. Capital speculation enlarges the imaginative space of grain prices, allowing futures prices to lead the trend of spot prices, and controlling the rise and fall of grain prices is as easy as pie. Grain prices are clearly embedded with unstable genes, and once anomalies accumulate to a certain extent, they will release risks. The release of this crisis reflects the complete ecosystem of economic civilization. The development of industrial economy, financial civilization, and other alienated agricultural food attributes undoubtedly turn to agricultural civilization for strong retaliation against industrial civilization and other civilizations. This kind of backbiting has made grain a strange attractor of instability in the world, even in the United States. There has also been a rice rush in China. In fact, food is becoming a more powerful political weapon than oil, rewriting world politics. Southeast Asia used to be the world's granary, however, has weak disaster resistance and high fertility rates. Agriculture is mainly focused on labor-intensive crops, while ideas remain stuck in the agricultural era, and its vulnerability has been exposed in the rice crisis. The United States, on the other hand, is uniquely endowed with not only 13.15% of the world's arable land, forming a large-scale agriculture with large-scale planting and industrial management, but also the ability to turn the tables in the financial market and seize the commanding heights of genetically modified crops in agricultural technology. This gives the United States both capital and strength to wield food weapons. The corn ethanol strategy implies an international strategy. On the one hand, the United States consumes excess corn under agricultural self-sufficiency and monopolizes the pricing.